Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at all the important articles in the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper and extract the important pointers relevant for the point of examination. Along with that, we shall also be taking a look at the answer writing and the practice questions for the mains examination. At the end of the discussion, I do suggest to you to take a look at the Telegram channel and do practice the MCQs, which have been picked out from the topic itself to understand your overall level of understanding and your assessment. Now, having said that, today we are going to have a discussion for around 11 different topics in varying degrees. So, first of all, the editorial section, that is India's IT dream, is at crossroads. Now, this talks about the IT sector and the churn that is present in the IT sector following the mass layoffs. Now, this is relevant for your GS paper 3. A case for energy efficiency in our country and the overall energy mix, also relevant for your GS paper 3. A Kerala story. This talks about the eradication of extreme poverty from Kerala and how it has been done and what is the way forward for the rest of the portion of the country as well. So this is again important for your GS paper 3 as well as GS paper 2. Then, has cloud seeding been effective? So, what is cloud seeding? What is the brief history about it? That is something we will be discussing. And what is its history when it comes to India? And why has the Delhi experiment not worked? This is relevant for your GS paper 3. What are the challenges with the BBNJ or the High Seas Treaty? So, what is this High Seas Treaty? This is also relevant for the GS paper 3. And some of the articles we are going to discuss in brief, relevant for your prelims section. Now, before we initiate the discussion of the topics, an announcement for all of you. Now, as we have already said that from 3rd to 5th of November, we have initiated the special classes program. Now, today you are going to have the special classes at 6:30 p.m. for polity, freedom of religion is the topic which will be covered, and also at 12 p.m. how India's geography defines its geopolitics from an IR perspective by Chetan sir. So do attend these special classes and do get your doubt resolved from a beginner perspective, understand the nuances of preparation for civil services as well. Now, without further ado, let us come to the first topic of the day, and that is India's IT dream is at a cross. Now, this is an article, a detailed piece which has been crafted by Shashi Tharoor. Now, this talks about the churn which is present in IT sector. Now, every day, every other day, you would be hearing about the news stories about mass layoffs carried out by companies like Amazon, by Meta, and so on and so forth. Even the Indian companies like TCS, they have announced the trimming of their workforce by around 3 to 4%, which means a layoff of close to around 20,000 professionals. Now, the IT sector in our country for decades now, for more than a couple of decades now, has been a kind of a lighthouse or has been a kind of a beacon of hope for a large number of population, particularly from the tier 2 and tier 3 cities of the country. Majority of the youth from the tier 2 and the tier 3 cities, they always followed the same template that get a degree in computer science or get a degree in IT, and your job will be stable and your future will be secure. But in the day of AI, in the day of disruption, in the era of transformative technology, that dream is at risk. And that is what the article basically talks about. So let us analyze this article in greater detail. When we talk about the IT sector, particularly the IT sector in India, the IT sector in India has been very, very important in terms of the economic productivity and also in terms of the job provision. Even though it does provide employment of close to around only 1% of population, but then overall, if you take a look at the contribution of it, the contribution is around 7% of the GDP, roughly around 7% of the GDP, which contributes close to around $280 billion to our economy. Now, that is a huge amount of contribution to the economic sector of our country. And mind you, this is just the direct contribution that we are talking about. At any point of time when you have to analyze any sector and its role in the economy, you cannot simply take a look at the output generated. Please understand, for example, let's suppose you have 500 million people who are getting employment directly or indirectly in the IT sector. All those people who will be earning some amount of money, they create demand in the economy as well. Now, the salary that they earn, with the same salary, they are able to buy houses, which creates a demand in the real estate sector, and that boosts the construction sector, which is again a large job provider in our economic setup. Other than that, for example, let's suppose they buy consumer items or the consumer goods, for example, refrigerators, air conditioners, etc. Now, that also ends up creating a substantial amount of demand in the economy, boosting the economic growth. So that is why this is the $280 billion that you see. That is a direct contribution to the economy, but the indirect contribution to the economy can be much larger. Now, this is the role of the IT sector in our country. But this is also an era of transformative tech, where you have newer technologies and newer organizations. For example, OpenAI, and we are living in an era of agentic AI. So, as a consequence of that, normal functioning, which would be carried out by the IT professionals otherwise, that normal functioning is something which is being taken over by AI now. That is why you will come across companies like Amazon laying off around 14,000, 30,000, these many number of professionals. Then even Meta, right? Meta is also laying off close to around 8,000 people from its workforce. Amazon, close to around 14,000 people from its workforce. Then TCS. Now, the domestic companies had largely kept themselves insulated or isolated from this global trend of mass layoffs. But now, even these domestic companies, that is TCS, Infosys, etc., they are also facing the brunt of this disruptive tech. Now, all this layoff which is happening, it is not going to be a sudden mass layoff. That one fine day, TCS has fired 30,000 people. No, it is what the industry basically tells us, that it is going to be a phased out manner and a phased wise manner of layoff. That is, you deny promotion or increment to the serving employees, and as a consequence they automatically shift out of the industry. Or in a way, you, based upon their performance parameters, you basically ensure that they are no longer a part of the workforce. In a way, you ensure for voluntary retirement, and these are the various different measures in which many people are being fired. Now, when it comes to TCS, now that is a point of concern for all of us. Now, TCS has basically decided and has announced as well that mid level to senior level. Now, these are the employees which are being fired or which are being slowly and steadily phased out of the company. Now, this raises a larger question at the viability of the entire IT sector in our country as well. Now, why is it that the IT sector, other than the fact that you have the AI, now we will explore the role of AI as well. But what are the major causes why this firing or these layoffs are happening? So there are different reasons associated. First of all, when we talk about the case of the IT sector industries, the AI that carries out the basic tools for which earlier you used to have large number of coders. Now, the scale of or the business model for all these IT sector companies like TCS and Infosys, that worked on the basic premise that hire a very large number of coders, train them in basic coding, and then deploy them globally in order to find solutions or in order to carry out the day to day activity. As a consequence, these companies would always end up hiring hundreds and thousands of people from the various campuses across the country. Now, that is something which has experienced a massive slowdown. And due to that slowdown, there has been many issues in terms of the existing employees finding it difficult to stay, the fresh graduates not being able to enter the workforce. So, there are multiple different aspects associated. For example, Let's suppose you consider a simple aspect of the coding, the work of the coding professionals. Earlier, the simple aspect would be ERP, that is the enterprise resource management, right? Now, in that enterprise resource management, what is this enterprise resource management? The SAP tools which would be used. For example, let's assume you have a large organization, a very large organization like an ITC or a Reliance. Now they have lakhs of people in their workforce. Now, how do you manage that workforce? How do you ensure timely appraisals? How do you ensure the reporting of each of them? How do you ensure the contingent workforce, that is the contractual worker? For all of that, you did require an IT team. You did require a kind of an IT coder to be sitting at the back end and doing and managing all of this. Now, in the day of AI, all these basic tools or all these basic activities can be managed by AI itself. You don't need people to do that. So, the enterprise resource professionals, etc., now they are becoming irrelevant. Irrelevant, right? So, when it comes to basic coding, basic coding, reporting, these activities, they are turning out to be irrelevant, and that is being replaced by AI. Replaced by AI. Then, other than that, you also have various different policies adopted by the client countries. Now, companies like Infosys, TCS, etc., they work on what principle? They work on the principle majority of their clients are based either in North America or in Europe. Now, North America and Europe, they have begun to tighten their immigration policy. And that is where you come across the new H-1B visa norms, whereby the companies have to pay close to around $100,000 in order to get a professional from India to be relocated to, let's suppose, US. Now, various different companies, they are finding that to be uneconomical. So that is why they are focusing upon hiring the local workforce in that particular case when it comes to the basic skills for that matter. So H1B visa norms, H1B visa norms now, and immigration policy, right? So this is another reason why the IT companies are facing a kind of a decline in terms of the workforce that they hired, right? So as a consequence, they are localizing of staff and employees. You don't need to bring staff from India and you don't need to pay for them and pay $100,000 in order to take them to US. It will be cheaper if you hire someone and lesser number of people in US itself. Third, majority of the clientele of these particular organizations or the client companies, now majority of them would be based in Europe and North America. Now, almost most of the countries of Europe and North America, they are facing a kind of an economic uncertainty. Their economies are not doing very well as compared to, let's suppose, the economies of Asia and so on. So as a consequence, even these countries, they are recalibrating their IT approaches. Earlier, it used to be the case that even a small sector or a small scale industry in, let's suppose, a country like Germany, in a country like Netherlands, they would have enough resources to give the services to TCS, and then the TCS or the Infosys of the day, they would carry out the purposes. But today, they are facing a cash crunch. Today, they are going across an economic uncertain time. And as a consequence, they are reluctant to pay these companies anymore for the same services. So that is where economic uncertainty in Europe, economic uncertainty in Europe and US. Now, that is another major reason. Okay. Now, other than that, when we talk about, and as I told you, the basic business model of these IT companies would be hire in large numbers, train them, and then basically ship them abroad so that they can solve the purpose. This would be a scalable model. And that is the model which has worked for our country for almost 3 to 3.5 decades, so to say. But then, slowly and steadily, the companies across the world, they are not looking at numbers anymore. For example, I don't need 50 IT workers in my organization to find me a better solution. I need one individual who can solve multiple different purposes, or go for multiple different roles. So rather than hiring in larger numbers, the countries across the globe, the companies across the globe, they are actually focusing upon smaller numbers, but then multi-purpose utility. So multi-purpose for numbers, purpose, utility for numbers. Okay. So these are the various different factors due to which you will find that the IT sector across the globe. Now, Amazon has publicly stated that it seeks to trim its workforce quite significantly, and that is why over the past couple of years it has been silently laying off large number of population of its workforce. Same is the case with Microsoft, same is the case with Meta. Almost all the IT sectors across the world, they are going through this churn. Indian IT sector is also not isolated. But the impact in Indian sector or Indian economy will be much more massive if the IT sector goes through a slowdown. We have talked about the contribution to the economy. We have talked about the direct and indirect role and the large number of job providers. Now, what is it that can be done going ahead into the future? After all, we know what is the problem. Now, does that mean that the IT sector is going through a slowdown? The answer is no. Basically, what it is going through is a kind of a change. And if we don't adapt to the change, very soon we shall basically be irrelevant as a sector as well. And that is where India's software edge can go away very, very quickly. So, what is the way forward here? The way forward, first of all, is retraining and reskilling. Now, various different organizations, they are already carrying out the mid-level or the mid-career retraining and reskilling activities, training the population with basic AI tools, and also few of them with a kind of specialized AI tools. So that reskilling at mid-career level, that is very important. But then this reskilling is something which should also be backed by the government. That is what the article argues, that if you leave it only to the companies per se, now these organizations will be able to train only their own professionals. They don't have the capacity to train the workforce of the entire country. So that is why there needs to be a kind of a public private partnership. Public private partnership. Okay. In order to provide the reskilling. Then there is another issue. The issue is that how our engineering curriculum or how our technical courses they are designed. Majority of our technical courses or curriculum, they focus on one aspect or one stream, and that is it. There is not a culture of that mid-career management programs or mid-career, let's suppose, upskilling programs. So that is where you need the updation and upgradation of our technical curriculum in the engineering colleges, in the professional degree courses, and so on. And also nowadays, it is no longer sufficient that I have a basic BTech or a Bachelor of Engineering, let's suppose in computer science, and my entire career is secured. One needs to go for multiple specializations, for example, cybersecurity, machine learning, then all of these neural networks, all of that is very, very important. So that is where tech courses, recalibration of the tech course, creation of technical courses. Now, majority of the technical courses in our country, they still focus upon the rote learning, right? You have certain amount of information which is fed to you as a student. The information might not be relevant in present day and age, but you are still learning and you are still being taught the same curriculum. So that needs to be updated. So updation of curriculum, that is very important. Then other than that, you also need to have basically multidisciplinary approach, disciplinary approach. Now, multidisciplinary approach in the sense that you need to provide a kind of efficiency in, let's suppose, cyber security, then machine learning, neural networks, all of them. Okay. As an IT sector employee, you cannot be happy with just one kind of proficiency that you have. Now, this is for the case of fresh graduates and even the existing people who want to keep themselves relevant in the long run. But what about that population which is facing the brunt of layoff? Now, when you are being laid off from any organization, that is a kind of a horrendous time, not only for you as an individual, but also for the larger family. Even though the family might be dependent or might not be dependent on you, but in the case of our country, we see that on the back of one professional, you have a large number of population which is dependent on them. So that is why the article argues that there needs to be a kind of a severance pay. In case you are being laid off, you need to be provided with a kind of a cushion. You need to be provided with some kind of a salary. So severance pay of 6 to 9 months by companies, by organizations. Now, other than this, what about those people who have been fired? Now, it is not only the economic aspect of it. Immediately, a person who has been laid off, they start to feel irrelevant in terms of their own professional aspects, their professional skills, and even in terms of what their own capabilities are. So that is why you need career counseling, you need mental help and mental counseling as well, so that they don't spiral into a kind of a vicious cycle of depression thereafter. So that the human capital which is present, which has got some skill, now that can be utilized in some other areas as well. So that is why the help, help in terms of the financial that we have talked about, financial, then psychological and mental support, psychological. Then, other than that, career counseling. Now, these are the things which needs to be provided. Now, if we carry out these activities, then we will ensure that the IT sector stays relevant in our country. It does continue to remain as a very bright job provider area in our country, because mind you, India is no China. When I say so, because in China you have a large sector of manufacturing. Now there you have some amount of job which you can gain, or some other opportunities that you can gain. In our country, the job opportunities when it comes to manufacturing sector, that is very limited. When it comes to, let's suppose, the primary sector, they are not well paying enough. In European nations, some of the primary sectors are also good, also carry out a good package. But in our country, primary sector is not that well paid enough. So the only option left for an aspirational youth is a service sector. And that is the reason why the youth carry out the degree courses in large amount. Now, in order to ensure that their faith in the system is maintained, in order to ensure that the youth do not drop up out of the professional colleges, for that, you need to change and you need to recalibrate the professional courses. Now, as is the case with any of articles written by Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Now, Dr. Shashi Tharoor basically mentions that the IT sector, the rose in itself, he compares the IT sector to the rose. Now, the rose in itself, that is not decaying. Few petals are being removed, but the roots, they still run deep. And in fact, he terms it to be a kind of a transformational metamorphosis of the IT sector, or in simple terms, a kind of a change. So that change in the IT sector is happening, and that is how we have to keep on track. Okay. Now, here, the practice question which can be asked. The Indian IT industry is going through a churn which can either make it or break it. Comment. Now, it is a 15 marker question, and this is a comment based question. So, in comment based question, you basically take a look at the statement. You initially try to justify the statement as well. And wherever possible, if required, you can contradict the statement as well, as is the case with the question in itself. Now, here, the requirement or the demand of the question is such, you as a candidate cannot say or cannot write an answer that no, Indian IT sector is going all hunky dory. There is no issue in the Indian IT sector, and this entire statement in itself is wrong. No, that is not the approach you can take here. So, how do you write the answer for this, supporting the argument of the statement as well? So, in the intro, you basically talk about the contribution of the IT sector in India. IT sector in India. Okay. The data pointer that I represented in terms of 1% of population contributing 7% to the GDP, providing employment to millions of population, hundreds of millions of population, contributing close to around $280 billion to the economy. So IT sector in India and its contribution. That is something that you mention. Then after that, in the body portion, the reasons for the churn. Reasons for churn. Now, here, when you talk about the churn, so please understand in the answer, that is the first time that you are actually talking about that, yes, it is going through a change. So that is where you can substantiate it with the data of mass layoffs as well. If you are able to recall it, talk about the mass layoffs and use that data. After that, in the body portion, you talk about the reason, AI, then the immigration policies, immigration, okay? Then after that, the global economy. Then after that, the case of multidisciplinary approach over scale, right? So numbers not needed anymore. Okay. Then after that, once you have talked about it, then talk about the way forward. It is a 15 marker question. So you have enough ample scope to talk about the way forward. You mention that way forward and then eventually come to the conclusion. In the conclusion, you again talk about the importance or the relevance of the IT sector. And what we have mentioned that the services sector is a major ray of hope for the larger number of youth population in our country, rather than ensuring or rather than throwing them into the arms of low income jobs. We need to recalibrate the tech courses, or we need to recalibrate our IT sector to ensure it stays relevant in the evolving 21st century. That is how you can end the answer. Okay. Now, after this, we come to the second article, the case for energy efficiency. Now, India as a country has been embarking upon an increased installation of renewable capacity, that is, solar power plants. Then, when it comes to, let's suppose, the wind power plants, all of these are being installed in large numbers. Now, as a consequence of that, India's overall installed capacity for renewables is close to around 50% of its overall energy capacity. I will repeat. India's installed capacity for renewables is already close to around 50% of the overall energy capacity. However, when it comes to the emission mixture or the emission that we are carrying out, that is getting dirtier by the day. That means more amount of CO2 emissions are happening from our energy sector day by day. So, despite a large amount of installed capacity, why is it that we are still emitting greater amount of CO2? That is what the article talks about. Now, the reason for that is what we will discuss. So, first of all, renewables account for about 50% of India's total installed capacity. And mind you, this was one of India's ambitions and India's stated objectives that India made at the Conference of Parties number 26 to UNFCCC in Glasgow, where India declared its Panchamrit mission. In Panchamrit mission, along with the net zero ambition by 2070, reduction of carbon intensity in GDP, all of that. Now, along with that, one of the stated goals was to have an installed capacity of around 50% in terms of renewables. But then the carbon intensity of India's electricity grid, what is measured in the form of grid emission factor, that has actually worsened. That means our emission has actually increased. Now, what is this grid emission factor? So, it measures the carbon dioxide emitted per unit of electricity generated. That is grid emission factor. This is important for your prelims. Okay. So, what is this grid emission factor? That is the amount of carbon dioxide emitted per unit of electricity generated. Now, if you take a look at the quantity of carbon dioxide emitted, so it increased from 0.703 tons of carbon dioxide per megawatt hour of energy generated in 2020-2021 to almost 0.727 tons of carbon dioxide per megawatt hour of electricity generated in 23-24. So that is where the amount of carbon dioxide emitted per megawatt hour that is now why is it so? And this is where it gets slightly technical, but bear with me, we will be able to understand that. What is the difference between installed capacity and the energy which is generated? Let's suppose I have basically dedicated a large area for a solar power plant. A solar plant. I have installed the solar panels which have a capability to generate, let's suppose, 200 megawatts. Now, 200 megawatts is the installed capacity. So, installed capacity for the solar power plant will be 200 megawatt. Okay. But then, is this also generating 200 megawatt? The answer is no. The case of the solar power plants, they operate at a very low efficiency or utilization rate. How much is generated, how much is actually utilized, right? So it might be possible that this entire solar power plant might be producing only 125 megawatt. And also, there is a temporal difference. Temporal means based on time. There's a time difference. These solar power plants, they would be able to generate a lot of electricity during the daytime. During the night time, the generated electricity will be almost negligible, isn't it? So that is why all that energy is restricted in only certain part of the day. What happens during rest of the day? For rest of the day, you have to rely upon the non-renewable fossil fuel sources like coal, right? That is why in the energy sector in India, there is oftentimes the saying that coal is the king. And basically, because the entirety of the country is dependent on the thermal power plants, which are based on the coal power generation. So that is why the coal power becomes the relying or the backbone aspect of it. Now, as a consequence, during peak hours, let's suppose during summer conditions, etc. Now, when the peak demand is there, now during the peak demand, again, there is a limited availability of these renewable energy sources and greater availability. And obviously, the fallback option is the non renewable energy source. So, that is again where the emission keeps on increasing. Right. As was also discussed in the Saturday's monthly current affairs of production gap report. Now, production gap report has highlighted that countries like India, they aim to further increase the utilization of coal as compared to what was their plan in 2023. So their utilization, the planned utilization of energy resources like coal, that is set to increase. Now, here, the reasons for that increased amount of emission despite a large installed capacity. Very low capacity utilization. Now, the solar and the wind power, they operate at 15 to 20% of utilization, whereas coal and nuclear power, they operate at 65 to 90% of capacity utilization. And this is not talking about the efficiency of it. This is simply the capacity utilization that I have 200 megawatts. How much of it am I utilizing in order to produce the energy? Okay. Then there is a temporal mismatch. That is production during the day, production during the day. Okay. And please understand one other aspect of renewable energy. That is something that you would already know, but maybe you would not have assimilated upon it. For example, let's suppose climate change is upon us. Now, climate change leads to increased cases of storms, cyclones, stronger winds, etc. But when you have cyclonic conditions, even the wind farms won't work, right? They are put to a stop because otherwise the blades get damaged in the case of very high velocity winds. Then, when you have these cloud cover or cyclonic systems, then even the solar power plants they have reduced efficiency. So, this renewable sector that is very much dependent upon the case of the climate change and the variability in the day-to-day climate also. When it comes to the medium and the small scale enterprises, MSMEs, now many of these MSMEs they do operate during the evenings and the night times. Now, at that point of time, renewable energy mix is present in lesser quantity. So that is why they have to, again, as a country, the grid has to rely upon the non-renewables like coal. Okay. So coal as the backbone during peak demand and peak hours. Capacity addition alone is not enough. You need a synchronization with the grid and you need ideal conditions to prevail as well. So, what is the way out? One of the way out is energy efficiency. When we say energy efficiency, in the basic terminologies, for example, in your household itself, let's suppose you are consuming 1 megawatt of energy in the entirety of the building, let's assume, or the entirety of the region, you are consuming 1 megawatt. Now, if tomorrow the entire region or your locality switches on into LEDs or energy saving devices, energy saving air conditioners, energy saving fans, energy saving lights, then this requirement of 1 megawatt that can reduce substantially, isn't it? So when the demand itself gets reduced, that is when you will have lesser amount of carbon emission. So that is where you can have an improvement thereafter. So energy efficiency measures like better appliances, motors, industrial processes. Now, many of the industries, they still use very old machineries. Machineries which are older than few countries itself. That is how old the machineries, for example, if you consider some of the jute mills that we have, if you consider some of the other textile mills that we have, the tanneries that we operate, now the machineries are quite old. Now, these older machineries, they are not energy efficient, obviously. So they consume large quantities of energy. And that also means increased input cost for the industrialists. So if you basically installed energy efficient motors and machineries and you encourage the SMEs, the small and medium scale enterprises, to actually operate during non peak hours, actually operate during daytime, then you can have greater utilization of renewables as well. The Bureau of Energy Efficiency estimates that India saved 200 million tons of oil equivalent of energy between 2017-18 to 22-23, cutting around 1.29 gigatons of CO2 and saving close to around 7.5 lakh crores. So energy efficiency cannot be overstated. So that is how important it is. Now, other ways forward basically accelerate energy efficiency standard. And this is going to be a nudge where the industries, the population, they have to work towards the 4-star, 5-star rating devices. That has to be made a norm. Support the SMEs to provide them the financial and the technical support to adopt efficient motors, pumps, and also go for modern machineries. Then dynamic pricing, so that flexible pricing structure, so that the industries they use more amount of energy during daytime, for example, when renewables are available, not during night time when the renewable capacity is slightly less. So accordingly the pricing structure also has to change. Then scrappage incentives, so the older devices, the older machineries that you have, we need to bring about a scrappage policy in a kind of an incentivization structure itself. For example, for the handloom sector, the government had come up with the Sfurti scheme. So, like that, you need to come up with the various schemes for the scrappage of old devices so that energy efficiency can be focused upon. We also cannot ignore the aspect of passive cooling. Rather than having installation of greater amount of air conditioners, natural cooling services and natural cooling facilities, uh, in the form of architectural design, in the form of building materials, that needs to be promoted. Green buildings are the way ahead. And also enable electricity services. So basically, electricity services like green cooling, high efficiency air conditioning power, passive cooling, that has to be promoted. Overall, India has managed to reduce the intensity of its GDP, energy intensity of its GDP, by almost more than 30%. But still, as per the requirement for climate change, we need to work harder upon that. So, the National Electricity Plan projects a fall in India's overall emission, that is to 0.548. Presently, it is 0.727. That will reduce to 0.548 by 26-27 and further to 0.430 by 31-32. This needs to be accelerated substantially. So, in a nutshell, in 30 seconds, what have we discussed? That our installed capacity for renewables has been increasing as per our national ambition, but the emissions are getting dirtier by the day. The reasons because of low capacity utilization of the renewables. There is a temporal change, that is the temporal utilization. Only during the day you will have the production of the renewables. During the night it is limited. So that is why majority of the economic activities during the night are dependent on coal. Capacity utilization does not always mean a greater energy mix as well. So, what needs to be done? Energy efficiency, scrappage policy, then pricing has to be dynamic so that the industries operate mostly during the time when the renewables are available. Okay. Now, after that, GEF basically ends up measuring the case of the carbon emission per unit of energy produced. That is grid emission factor. That is the full form of GEF, and that is the aspect of GEF. Okay. Now, here, that is the case of this energy efficiency. Then we come to the third article, a Kerala story. Now, when we say Kerala story, here on its 69th formation day, that is 1st November, Kerala has announced the eradication of extreme poverty from the state. That is, the state government claims that there is no longer any person who suffers from extreme poverty. Now, that is a major milestone. Mind you, obviously, whenever any government of the day will claim that, there will be multiple criticisms. There have been criticisms leveled at the Kerala government that look at the tribal population. They are still suffering from that. There is stagnant growth. There is not enough job opportunities. So, those are the allegations that will always happen, criticism which will always happen. So if you keep that on the side and focus upon the eradication program for extreme poverty. Now, extreme poverty eradication program was launched in May 2021, and Kerala has been very successful in terms of the social reforms, in terms of the health factor, education indicators. In all these, for decades now, Kerala has been a kind of a leading state across the country. Finally, what Kerala has managed to do is managed to have the eradication of extreme poverty. Mind you, the multidimensional poverty index, something that we discussed yesterday, the parameters of it we discussed yesterday. Now, as per the Niti Aayog's multidimensional poverty index, Kerala has got only 0.55% population which is poor. National average is around 14%. So obviously the state is doing something which is very right. So what is it that the state is actually doing? So, and understand the difference in approach as well. When it comes to eradication of poverty, many of the states of the country, they rely upon, they all of them have the poverty eradication or poverty reduction programs. But many of the states, what they rely upon is that if I am a poor person, I will report to the government, I will get myself enumerated, I will get myself in the record of the government, and the government will pay me, and the government will provide services to me so that the poverty is eradicated. Now, obviously, very poor population, they always do not have the ability to go to the government offices and get themselves enumerated. Knowing this issue, what Kerala government did, it embarked upon a proactive approach where it sent its government workers, the Kudumbashri workers and the other NGOs as well. Now it sent it to the grassroots. All the workers, they went on to grassroots and they actually collected the data wherever possible with each of the individuals. They basically crafted their own solutions, tailor-made solution. It was not a one size fits all solution. Whichever kind of a help in terms of treatment of diseases, in certain cases even organ transplants, in certain cases provision of basic jobs, for example in the state data centers where they can have some amount of meaningful income, in creation of IDs, all of that was done. As a consequence, people started earning and people got some amount of meaningful income. Now, this is a proactive approach which has worked for the state of Kerala. And that is what the Kerala model is being talked about. Now, that can surely be applied in many parts of the country. And yesterday, we had also discussed about the difference between the welfare, distributive welfareism, and the case of institutional reform. So, rather than going for distributive welfareism, this is one of the model which can be adopted by other states of the country as well for the upliftment of the larger population, right? So here, as per Niti Aayog's 2023 Multidimensional Poverty Index, Kerala has the lowest poverty rate, 0.55%, whereas the national average is around 15%. Poverty fell in Kerala if you take a look at the journey of the poverty and the declining poverty over decades. So in 1973-74, poverty rate was 59.8%. In 2011-12, the poverty rate reduced to 11.3%. So that is a massive drop, and that extreme poverty has further been reduced. Now, how was it done? Around 4 lakh trained enumerators identified 64,000 extremely poor families using four criteria: access to food, health, livelihood, and housing, right? Whether you have access to any of them or all of them. Each family received a customized micro plan. Essentials like ID documents, housing, medical care, as I told you, in certain cases, even organ transplants have been facilitated, cooked meals, and palliative or organ care. Now, it was community driven, local self government department, along with multiple Kudumbashri workers as well. Now, this has been very significant. Now, Kerala government, what it has done is that it has launched EPEP, Eradication Program for Extreme Poverty 2.0. That is, it is not resting upon this achievement. It has launched the EPEP 2.0, which means that they are going to further work upon to ensure that this marginalized population, which has just been uplifted from poverty, they don't fall back into the clutches of poverty again. So, whatever help is required, that is what the government workers will do. Now, mind you, any particular aspect, any particular topic has got both sides to it. There is the counter argument and the criticism which is also leveled that Kerala's economy overall has stagnated. It is not growing substantially, due to which people are not able to find enough jobs. And that is why Kerala is also facing an issue of mass migration. Despite the fact that the literacy rates are very high, the utilization of the human capital is very, very low. Now, that is something that the government has to work upon. Other than that, when it comes to the tribal population, particularly the marginalized population in the eastern belt of the state, now that is where the help is oftentimes sporadic and intermittent. So, there also, this poverty eradication program has to be uniform. So, this is where it has to work further upon, but nonetheless, it is a major achievement to be declared as extreme poverty free. Okay. Now, has cloud seeding been effective? So, what is this concept of cloud seed and has it been effective? Now, after around 50 years, this cloud seeding has been tried out in Delhi, but it has had limited success and it is met with failures because after the cloud seeding program was done, now Delhi did not receive rainfall. There were some reports of slight drizzle in certain areas, which seemed to have improved the air quality in small pockets, but not an overall change. So, what is this concept of cloud seeding and what is its history as well? So, first of all, what is cloud seeding? Cloud seeding is the facilitation of rain. How do you do that? So basically, for that, the basic formation of clouds. The clouds, they form because of water vapor which evaporates from the ground surface. Now, that water vapor, after rising up from the ground surface, it tends to cool down, right? It tends to cool down. Now, as it cools down, it loses temperature. Water vapor gets converted into liquid water droplets, or if the temperature is very low, it can condense into ice particles as well. Now, they can be dispersed. Let's suppose few droplets are present here, here, and so on. Now, in that particular case, there won't be enough concentration of these droplets or condensates to cause immediate rainfall. So, what is done with a kind of a rocket, a balloon, or nowadays with the help of aircraft, you actually spray certain particles like calcium chloride, silver iodide, all of that you spray. Now, what these particles are, they are in a way hygroscopic, right? So, as a consequence, hygroscopic means they will attract the water molecule. So, on the surface of this silver iodide, right? Silver iodide, then even KCl2 has been used. All of this is used. Now, in this particular case, they are hygroscopic. They attract water molecule. When they attract water molecules, there will be greater concentration of water molecules, more condensation in a small region. As there is more concentration in a small region, that means chances of rainfall in this region will increase and the region will receive rainfall. So that is the concept of cloud seed. Okay, so with the aircraft and aircraft jet inject silver iodide or other substances into the atmosphere, the chemicals mimic the particles that act as surface for condensation, and once the condensation creates water droplets that are large enough, rainfall happens. Now, this was a kind of an accidental discovery way back in the 60s when you had the General Electric's engineer, the US scientist, Vincent Schaefer and Bernard Vonot. Now, they discovered that dry ice and silver iodide could trigger precipitation. Now, they went ahead to try it on the clouds and they were able to successfully mimic a snowfall, cause a snowfall in a region. US government immediately became very interested and the US government, in fact the entire movement started way back in the 1940s. So it is almost a quarter century old exercise. Cloud seeding is not something which is very new. Now, the US government, when it got excited about it, it thought about a program that if let's suppose we can create the artificial clouds, we can also manage to dissipate or remove the cloud. So, in that way, can we tame or can we, in a way, control the hurricanes? US would always suffer from very large hurricanes. So, can we control hurricanes? So, that is where Project Cirrus was launched by the US government to control hurricanes. But that was an abject failure. It was not successful because obviously hurricanes are massive forces of nature, massive amount of energy, and cloud seeding and cloud dispersion cannot be successful there. Then they carried out Project Skywater. Now, this was to create artificial rain over the Rockies. Rockies, for those of you who are unaware, are basically the mountain range in the northwestern part of the US and even in Canada. So there they also carried it out. Now, this had been used in the Soviet Russia as well. Now, during the parade days, Soviet Russia would create this artificial rain to have a clear climate. And even China, famously, during the Beijing Olympics of 2008. Now, China, just right now, how Delhi is infamous, and in a way, Delhi is vilified for the quality of air. China, at around 2000s, was also suffering from the same issue. So, China was hosting Olympics, and that was going to be a landmark achievement of China for the rest of the world, the success of hosting that Olympics. So, before the opening ceremony of the Olympics of 2008, the air had a lot of smog, lot of pollution. So, China carried out this artificial rain in Beijing in order to clear that amount of pollutant, and it was partially successful as well. In India, the first experiment with cloud seeding was carried out way back in 1952 when K.R. Ramanathan, uh, basically the first Director General of Indian Meteorological Department, carried that out. And later on in 1989, under Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, that is Pune. Now, India in 2009 also launched what is known as the CAPEX project. Now, what was this? This was to understand that whether cloud seeding is actually successful in bringing rainfall. If yes, what is the quantifiable amount? So that is where the cloud aerosol interaction and precipitation enhancement experiment, relevant for your prelims again. Now, this was carried out in 2009 by Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, Pune. Where was it carried out? In the drought prone district of Solapur in Maharashtra. Obviously, drought prone region, if that receives rainfall, you have a quantifiable advantage. Okay. So from 2017 to 19, CAPEX scientists used aircraft and radar to physically identify the clouds which were suitable for rain. Now, once the experiment was carried out, it was found out that 867 million liters of additional water showing measurable but limited success, a slight amount of greater rainfall. But it basically depended on the cloud quality and the cloud type. It varied from one particular cloud to another. So that is why cloud seeding has got its own issues. The issues such as very high cost, very high cost. Okay, the trained pilots, then deploying the aircraft, utility of the aircraft, spraying of those materials, it is costly. It is then uncertain. Also, where does it cause rain? The region. Now, if you have carried out cloud seeding over a particular area, it need not be the case that rainfall will happen there itself. It might happen 100 kilometers to the east, west, north, or south. So, region, uncertainty. Okay. Then, depends on the types of clouds. So limited success. So this is its limitation. It cannot be repeated time and time again. It can only be carried out so many times. Now, in the case of Delhi, the air quality is very poor. Air quality is very poor, particularly in these months, owing to the issue of stubble burning, owing to the issue of the winds being brought over. So that is why the air quality, vehicular emissions, all of them, climatological, environmental factors, air quality is very poor. So the aim of this artificial rain or the cloud seeding has been that if you have rainfall during these conditions, all the particulate matters, all the pollutants which are suspended in the air, they can then be brought to the ground and the air can be clean once again. But then the problem has been that there is no success associated. Why? Because during these months, that is in the month of October, November, the air over Delhi is very dry. October, November, Delhi has got dry air. Now, when Delhi has got dry air, that basically means that you don't have enough density of clouds to cause rain. Water vapor content in itself is very low. So, hence, you basically have low chances of rain, right? Of rain. So, that is why Delhi can have a successful cloud seeding during the monsoon month when you have those monsoonal type of clouds, dense clouds. But during these months, when the air is dry, when there is no moisture, then artificial moisture cannot be created. You have the acceleration of cloud formation, but no artificial moisture. Hence, the Delhi experiment has been a kind of a failure. No rainfall has occurred. Okay. Now, what is cloud seeding? Discuss its importance to combat climate change. A straightforward question. So, basically, what do you write in that? In the intro, you talk about the case of cloud seeding. Draw the schematic diagram as well. Okay. So, intro, what it is, what is it? Okay. Then, after that, in the body, draw the diagram, which is represented. Then, after that, talk about the relevance of it, importance in combating climate change. So, can cause rainfall, causes rain, reduces the temperature, fights against heat waves, drought cycles, all these factors can talk about. Okay? Right. Hygroscopic particles can be present, but if you don't have moisture, how will you have cloud formation? If you don't have water vapor, how will you have cloud formation? If let's suppose an air is very dry in this room, I spread too much amount of silver iodide, will that cause rainfall? It won't. You need that amount of moisture to be available as well. Now, what are the challenges with the high seas treaty? Now, high seas treaty has been ratified. It was in negotiation for around 3 to 4 years now. Now, this high seas treaty has been ratified by more than around 60 nations and eventually will come into force in January 2026. So, what is this high seas treaty? What do we first of all understand by the concept of high seas? And there was this condition that unless and until this treaty is ratified by 60 nations, this won't come into force. Now that 60 nations have ratified it, it will come into force in January 2026. However, there are certain challenges. But first of all, before that, what do we understand by high sea? And why do we need a high sea? So, to give you a simple idea, when we talk about the marine areas of the world, right? So, in the marine areas or the maritime zones, you will find that as compared to the coastline, if you consider the coastline as the baseline as it is considered, 12 nautical miles is the territorial sea, very much the jurisdiction of the country involved. Then 24 nautical miles is what is your contiguous zone, right? Exclusive economic zone is 200 nautical miles from the baseline. Beyond that exclusive economic zone, the ocean that is there or the sea that is there, this is known as the high seas or also what is referred to as the area. Now, when it comes to pollution in the territorial sea or exclusive economic zone, the country in itself, the country responsible can be held accountable. But what about the oil spill, the mineral extraction, the excessive amount of killing of biodiversity, whaling activities, extraction of this biopiracy in the high seas? Who is accountable for that? So, majority of the biodiversity across the globe, that is something, the endangered biodiversity in particular, that is something that you will find in the high seas. So that is why the world came upon a consensus that look, as per the United Nations Convention on the Law of Seas, that is UN clause, United Nations Convention Law on the Seas, that talks about the territorial sea, that talks about the contiguous zone, that talks about the exclusive economics, but that does not talk about the high seas. So how do we ensure that the high seas and the biodiversity in the high seas are protected? For that, you basically had the BBNJ, that is biodiversity beyond the natural jurisdiction or the High Seas Treaty, which was arrived at. So, this High Seas Treaty talks about various different tools, for example, establishment of marine protected areas in the high seas, establishment or basically carrying out environmental impact assessment for any economic activity to be carried out in the high seas. So, all these activities, that is something that the High Seas Treaty carries out, or all these measures the High Seas Treaty basically focuses upon. When it comes to, let's suppose, a discovery or a kind of a benefit, economic benefit coming out of the high sea. Now, the provision also includes the sharing of the benefits of that discovery with the local community. The fair and equitable access sharing, that is something which the local community will also benefit from. So that the local community, the small island nations, they also participate in the conservation of the high seas. They also become a stakeholder. So that is basically the aspect of the high seas. It identifies the marine genetic resources as the common heritage of humankind, ensuring fair and equitable sharing of benefits. Area based management tools like marine protected areas, environmental impact assessment. But then there are certain challenges. What are the challenges? The governance effectiveness. You have the superpowers like the China, US, China, etc. They are not a part of this treaty. So, as a consequence, who can stop these countries from still manipulating the high seas, from still exploiting the high seas? Now, that is a challenge that the world has to overcome. That is the challenge that the world has to tackle. Then there is an ambiguous language which is used in the treaty: fair and equitable access and benefit sharing. Now, how much of benefit will you share? Let's suppose in the high seas around the Pacific, around, let's suppose, a country like Tuvalu, you find the presence of corals, and some of those chemicals secreted by the corals are able to cure cancer. Now, how much of it will Tuvalu end up earning? So, as a consequence of ambiguous language, this leaves room for exploitation by the pharmaceutical and the multinational companies, where the smaller countries can lose out. And lack of verifiable data. We don't have enough data about the biodiversity in the high seas. So, the exploitation of that uh, biodiversity, that also is something which cannot be always verified, which means, again, it can be exploited. So these are the challenges that the High Seas Treaty must resolve very soon. Otherwise, as is the case with multiple various different treaties of environment across the world, it can also end up being irrelevant. Now, coming to certain articles relevant for your prelims purposes: Chennai Port to get deeper channels for larger vessels. Now, mind you, yesterday we had discussed about the aspect of dredging, right? The use of dredging and Dredging Corporation of India Limited. So basically, you have the Chennai port now, which is a very instrumental port for trade in the eastern part and the eastern coast of India. So that is where this Chennai port is being deepened. The two of the docks there, they are being deepened so that larger ships, around 300 meters plus ships, they can actually come there and they can actually berth there. That will improve the amount of trade which can be carried out and the economic benefit as well. This kind of dredging is what is referred to as capital dredging. dredging. So you have maintenance dredging that we talked about due to sedimentation yesterday. You also have what is capital dredging. So this is a kind of a capital dredging which is carried out. Then, Great Nicobar Project. Now, the government agencies have basically said, the Andaman Nicobar administration has basically said that it is ready with the denotification of the tribal reserve area and the re-notification of the tribal reserve area for the tribal population in the Great Nicobar Islands. Now, the tribals which will be impacted by the construction activity, by the entire creation of infrastructure for the Great Nicobar project, they shall be relocated there. Now, this Great Nicobar project is under large amount of criticism and large amount of dispute. But the government uh, in the past week has basically said that we are aware about the limitations of environmental damage, and we are basically managing that. We are ensuring that the environmental impact is not very high. We are ensuring that the tribal population does not get impacted and can get relocated. So the government is pressing ahead with the Great Nicobar project, but then the kind of criticism and the opposition is also amplified. Now, for your prelims perspective, you need to know what the Great Nicobar project is. The administration has also said that the local residents or the local shelter, the temporary shelter or temporary residence for the working population, which will go to Great Nicobar to carry out the construction activities, those temporary towers have already been constructed. So that means we are very close to the construction phase being initiated. So Great Nicobar project has got four components. Which are those four components? So out of those four components, if you retain two of them, rest two will follow automatically. First of all, you have the airport, right? Airport, which will be utilized by the Air Force as well as the civilian airport. Then, other than that, now that is seeking to utilize the tourism potential of the Great Nicobar Islands as well. Mind you, Great Nicobar region has got Campbell Bay National Park and the Galathea Bay National Park. Two of the protected areas are there. So, airport is there. Other than that, you have the transshipment hub, right? And a port. Now, these are the two major projects. Then, in order to support them, you also need a kind of a power plant, right? You need a power plant to provide energy. And then, for all the population which will be deployed, which will be working in these areas, you need a township as well. So these are the four parts of the Great Nicobar project. That is something. And along with that, Campbell Bay National Park and Galathea Bay National Park, that is the aspect associated with your prelims examination. Okay. Then India Bahrain hold talks on boosting defense and trade ties. Now, you basically had the Bahrain, right, External Affairs Minister of India and the Bahrain Foreign Affairs Minister. They held a meeting in New Delhi where um, Minister Jaishankar basically reiterated India's belief in the Gaza peace plan by Mr. Trump. And basically, he focused upon the fact that India wishes and India hopes that this Gaza peace plan will be a success. Now, other than that, India and Bahrain, they are basically aiming to increase the trade ties. They are working on double tax, double taxation avoidance agreement, which will further provide impetus to the trade and also to the professionals working in Bahrain. So that will increase the amount of trade. And Bahrain has said that India is amongst the top trading partners of Bahrain. So it attaches greater importance. More defense exercises have also been discussed between India and Bahrain. Now, heavy metals found in Cauvery fish. So, a detailed study has been carried out across the river Cauvery in various different locations, and fish species like the tilapia, they have been actually examined. Now, it has been found out that from various different sources, large amount of contaminants, carcinogenic contaminants, are being released in the river Cauvery. Now, what is happening is that these fishes, slowly and steadily, the amount of contaminant in their body is increasing, right? By the process, what is referred to as bioaccumulation. So, if let's suppose the fishes they keep on consuming the same contaminated source, or they'll keep on living in same contaminated source, the contaminant level in their body will increase. And slowly and steadily, as let's suppose people who are living on the banks of river Kaveri, they are also consuming these fishes in larger amount or on a daily basis or on a frequent basis, the contaminant level in their body can also be increased. Now, which are the type of contaminants which are found to be present in the fishes? So, in these fishes, chromium, right? Chromium is generated from which particular industry? From basically electroplating metal industry. You have a lot of chromium which is released. Cadmium, copper, lead, zinc. Now, these can carry out disability based diseases in various different individuals, particularly the vulnerable population, that is the young ones and the old age population, that can be very harmful, right? So industrial effluents from textile, electroplating, and metal industries, then agricultural runoff, fertilizer, and pesticide, and urban sewage and untreated wastewater, they are adding to the contaminants in Kaveri. This is also a question which was asked in the mains examination last year about the river contamination in India. So that is where you need to know about the type of contaminants and the type of industries Now, strong demand lifts manufacturing PMI to 59.2 in October. So, HSBC India's manufacturers purchasing managers index in October has indicated a 17-year high of 59.2. Right. Mind you, any number beyond 50 or higher than 50 indicates an expansion. 50 means status quo, less than 50 means contraction. So there has been, the PMI has indicated the number of 59.2. Now, this is based upon the GST rationalization. You had the rationalization of the GST rates, which has created a strong impetus of demand in the economy. And due to that strong impetus of demand in the economy, what has happened? People have placed large number of orders. So input inventories are at an all-time high, and that is why the industries, they are basically looking at boosted growth of output and buying levels. Now, in August as well, it was basically in September, it was 57.7, right? In August, it was 59.3. So, overall, this is indicating that in this particular quarter, partly second and third quarter, the economic activities have been on the upswing, right? Now, the last article of the day, India trims Russian oil imports by 29% in September. So, owing to the US pressure of increased tariff rates, India has basically reduced its imports from of Russian oil. Even China is doing so, various different countries are doing so. So, Russian oil in the entire oil mix that India imports, earlier it had a share of close to around 40%. That has declined to close to around 31%. India has actually diversified its point of from where it is importing the oil. For example, the Gulf nations like Saudi Arabia, there has been marginal increase. From US also, there has been marginal increase. Other than that, India has started importing oil from newer regions like Nigeria, Turkey, Libya, and Egypt. Nigeria, Turkey, Libya, and Egypt. These are the new sources. From Canada, earlier it was importing around 1.3%. That has been reduced now to zero. Now, this also means that earlier Russian oil was available at close to around $500 a ton in September 2025. Now, that is being substituted. So, for example, crude from UAE is at $543 a ton. From Saudi Arabia, it is $560 a ton. From US, it is at $549 a ton. And from Libya, a whopping $602 a ton. So while it is diversifying its import basket, it is also paying a slightly heavier cost associated. So you need to know about the new sources of oil and also the overall impact on cost. So that brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. I hope the discussion has been helpful. If you have liked the content, put that in the comment section and do take a look at the multiple choice questions which have been present in the Telegram channel. So see you again. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.